Serious, what is the most paranormal or unexplainable events you have witnessed? One day I was with my friends and suddenly my head started getting heavy and my vision began to white out at the point where I couldn't see anything at all. I immediately thought that someone could have drugged me and asked my friends to help me walk to a place where I could get some air and sit down. My sight was coming back but I couldn't speak or express anything, couldn't respond or answer what my friends were asking. Somehow I got into a trance and it felt like I was seeing my surroundings from an above me perspective. My friend called my mom and she picked me up. I still couldn't respond until I got home and went to the bathroom. 3 days later my mom received a call from my grandpa and I immediately knew what was going on. He told her that my dad had passed away and was found dead in his bathroom. I live with my mom and my dad used to live in other state. The forensic report showed that he died in that exact date and probably around the moment I've had that episode. On the day my father died I was alone in the apartment we lived in. While everyone was out mourning at my uncle's, I stayed home because I didn't want people to stare at me sobbing. Anyways, I'm in the living room and I hear footsteps in my mother's room that has a balcony. I straight up hear the balcony door open, so now I'm like sobbing and shouting asking who's there. I go check it out and there's no one there except a strong smell of tobacco in the room. My father used to smoke on the balcony. Never told anyone about it and just kept it for myself. Later learned my mother got blamed for my dad's death, even though they loved each other since they were teens and my dad was simply a victim of cancer, and a massive brawl broke out, so I just thought of it as my dad coming home because he couldn't be bothered to hear people arguing. I was a kid, maybe 10 years old. I came inside in the evening after playing outside in the backyard. I stopped by the exterior door to take my shoes off and just happened to notice that the basement door across the room was closed and dead-bolted. It was an old door that didn't stay totally closed unless dead-bolted. I look down to untie one of my shoes and I hear a loud bang and look up to see the basement door wide open. I noped the f*** out of there with my shoes still on. My parents were in the other room and didn't hear a thing. I went back later and the door/lock were totally undamaged. I have absolutely no idea what caused it and can't really come up with any rational explanation. I was pretty afraid of going in the basement for a while. My stepdad found our puppy Eddie on the side of the road. Someone had thrown him out of a moving car, and he had broken legs, broken teeth, a swollen and closed eye, and was severely dehydrated. My stepdad took him to the vet and paid quite a bit of money for surgeries to get Eddie fixed up. He got attached to the doggo, so we ended up adopting him. After that, even though he was the family dog, he was best buds with my stepdad. Anywhere my stepdad was around the house, you could find Ed tagging along. Eddie and I grew up together. He died while I was in college, and my parents buried him in a pet cemetery. Since it was sort of sudden and I was far away, I didn't get to say goodbye. A few months after that, I had a dream where Eddie comes and find me. His hair is matted and dirty, and his flesh looks kind of rotted, but he's wagging his tail and seems really happy to see me again. Eddie starts leading me down a hazy path, and the farther we go, the faster his tail wags. Finally, we get to this giant wall of mist that extends across the entire horizon and rises higher than I can see. Eddie gets real close to it before trotting back to me. He licks my hand, gives me a couple of nose boops and whines a little. Then he turns around again and starts to do that happy dog prance toward the wall until he finally passes through it. I can sort of see his outline jumping up and down excitedly next to a human-shaped figure. I jog after Eddie and reach my hand out to touch the wall, hoping I'll be able to pass through it, too. That's when my cell phone rings in real life, waking me up. When I answer it, my mom is on the other end crying. My stepdad had just died of a heart attack. Oh God. This one gave me chills. The opposite happened with my grandfather. My mom's family had a pup named Max. But he was essentially my grandpa's dog. Went everywhere, loved him more than anyone. My grandpa unexpectedly died of a heart attack when my mom was 16. After, Max was always depressed. A short while later he died too, the vet said, of a broken heart. At least they're both reunited now. About 5 years ago my husband and I went to visit his grandma. Big, beautiful 2-story house. I was going to head upstairs to put some pajamas on and saw a woman walk across the top of the stairs. It was only my husband, young daughter, and his grandma in the house, and whoever I saw wasn't Granny. I went in the living room and told them what I saw, and his grandma goes, "Yeah, that's Lori. She visits a lot." Lori was my husband's mom who had died when he was 11. I was so f***ing spooked after that I barely slept the rest of the time we were there. Elderly people can be surprisingly chill about ghosts. My aunt's mother has one she calls George. Every few nights he stops by to brush his teeth in her bathroom. She hears water running, brushing, some gurgling, and then he's gone. I have one. It must have been some kind of hallucination, but it really scared me. I was sitting in my bed watching YouTube for a couple hours. I got up and reached forward to set something on my nightstand or whatever. I had this strange undescribable feeling that I hadn't actually moved from where I was sitting at all. I quickly turned around and looked at where I was sitting seconds before, and there I was, still sitting there. I was outside my body. I could see the shocked, horrified expression come to my face at such a strange sight. I quickly sat back down right in the same spot and nothing strange happened again. I know you weren't sleeping, but this reminded me of the strangest dream. I floated out of my body and onto a floating pillow, and I could see myself sleeping on my bed. I rode the pillow down the hall of my house and into the living room, and my one dog was laying on the back of the couch and the other was on the rug. I floated back to my body and I woke up. Curious, I went into the living room and my dogs were in those very same spots. The Chinese actually believe that you should not paint a sleeping person's face because when we are asleep our spirit wanders, and if they can't recognize our face they can't return to it. I had an out-of-body experience once, though it was after a significant surgery, and I have to believe that the extreme pain had something to do with it. It wasn't what I would have imagined something like that would be, cool, fun, etc. It was rather unsettling. When I was in high school, my younger brother and I shared a bedroom. His bed was on one side of the room and mine was on the other. My brother was an avid sleepwalker and would also talk in his sleep all of the time. Sharing a bedroom with him, it was unsettling at first, but I eventually got used to it. One night, it's about 3 a.m. and I suddenly wake up from a deep sleep, instantly alert. I had this urge to look towards my brother's bed. I felt a presence in the room. When I turned my head, I saw a tall, skinny shadow/human-like figure, and it was reaching its hand down towards my sleeping brother's face. Its hand got maybe an inch away before its head jerked to the side and looked at me, staring at it, frozen. The shadow then faded and moved up into the air, vanishing through the ceiling. Immediately, my brother shot up out of his bed, stood, and walked to the light switch. He turned it on and looked at me. In a very calm and solemn voice, he says, "Did you feel it? Did you feel the hand?" He then turned off the light and went back to his bed. I hid under my covers the rest of the night. My brother doesn't remember any of it. I work with donated human tissue. We process stuff like bones, tendons, and skin for transplant. The controlled work area that we process the tissue in, definitely has weird things happen in it. Small stuff like repeated or inexplicable equipment failure, tools falling off flat surfaces, and sometimes the tissue itself will react strangely to processing, i.e. a young donor whose tissue will fall apart or exhibit other poor disposition for one reason or another. Sometimes a donor will have so many problems befall their processing, that it just feels like they did not want their former body parts to be transplanted. I have definitely got strange vibes while working. I'm not saying that they are knowingly or purposefully haunting us, but there is an energy that is hard to deny. Mine's not crazy scary, but it is true. I was in the living room with my grandma, we were the only ones home. She was working on a crossword puzzle, and I was messing around on my iPad. TV was off, windows were closed. All of a sudden, clear as day, I hear my name being whispered, but since it was so quiet it sounded loud. I looked up to my grandma, thinking it was her, asking her if she said something. She said no, but I heard your name. I have a couple. The first one was when my ex died. I had a 4-month-old daughter with him at the time, but we didn't live together. The night he died, I heard someone walking into the bedroom where my daughter was and very clearly heard his voice talking to her. I called out, thinking he may have came in through the back, but no one answered. I found out the next day he died sometime during the night, probably around the time I heard the voice. The second one happened at the last place I lived. It's nothing terribly spooky, but I rented a townhouse and figured out that in my daughter's room there was attic access. I was stoked because that meant I could probably store my Christmas decorations up there. I get a kitchen chair to open it up and I couldn't. Not physically it was easy to open. Something mental stopped me from doing it. I had a huge fear. So I left it alone. Sometimes I'd get really eerie feelings, but I chalked it up to it being the first place I've lived in alone in a while, 2 years at that point, but I don't get those feelings in my new apartment at all. I found out from my neighbor not too long after the attic incident that the guy who lived there before me was a raging alcoholic and hung himself in the house. In my daughter's room. The one with the attic access. Was reading through and there's some scary shit in here, so I got a wholesome one. My grandmother struggled with dementia for many years before she passed, and I didn't spend as much time with her as I would have liked. I felt really guilty about it the whole day after I heard what happened. That night I had a dream in which my grandmother was standing in a beautiful golden wheat field with a path through it. She said, "Everything's okay, sweetheart." I woke up with tears in my eyes and the feeling that everything was fine. A few years ago, about a year after we moved into our house, my mom and I were home alone with our dog. I was in one bedroom and my mom was in another right across the hall. I heard my dog's toy squeaking down at the end of the hall, so I figured she was playing with it, no big deal. Then my dog came running into the bedroom, without a toy, but the squeaking continued. My dog was running around like crazy, in and out of the bedrooms as if she was trying to figure out where the squeaking was coming from. I figured my mom was teasing her, trying to get her to play. It continued for a few minutes and my dog was getting crazier and crazier until my mom called across the hall for me to stop squeaking the damn toy, you're making the dog crazy. So I stepped into the hallway and said, "I don't have the toy, I thought you were squeaking it." At this point the squeaking had stopped, and we were both freaked out, standing right next to each other with the dog sitting between us. We looked down the hallway and the toy was sitting there, nothing touching it. Suddenly it started squeaking like crazy, as if someone were jumping up and down on it. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up and I was frozen in place. My mom almost started crying. The energy was just so weird, I can't even explain it. Turns out the previous owners had a dog that died in the house, and they told my parents that the ghost of the dog comes around from time to time. Now, I've always been iffy about the existence of ghosts, but I swear that ghost dog was playing with my dog's toy. I'll bring out this story again. It happened to me 7 years ago and I can't figure it out, but I lost an hour of time in what felt to me like minutes. At the time I was working from home after a serious illness diagnosis. I had settled into a routine, up at 7 a.m. and do house stuff and shower, then at 8 a.m. start prepping my work and laying out my day. Phone calls and emails from 8 to 9. This is all I remember. It was 7:55 and I brewed a cup of Keurig coffee on my kitchen located on the main floor of my house. I went upstairs to my office and turned on my computer to settle in and realized I forgot the coffee in the kitchen. I went back downstairs and got the coffee as soon as I realized I forgot it. Couldn't have been more than the time it took Windows to boot up, but I took a sip and the coffee was cold. Not warm, but actually cold. I thought my Keurig was broke, but I looked at the clock and it said 9:14. So whereas I expected it to be 8:05 max, somehow an hour and 10 minutes passed without explanation. It was very bothersome. I have no idea where that hour went. I have never had any blackout before or since, no seizures, and the meds I was on shouldn't have caused a lapse like that. I don't think I fell asleep because I distinctly remember typing my password and saying out loud, I forgot the coffee. It kinda left me uneasy a bit. Nothing like had ever happened to me before or since. This happened to me too. I posted this the last time someone mentioned it 5 months ago. I don't think it was as there were detectors on each floor. My GF and I had a similar experience a year ago. Our phone alarms went off at 6:30 a.m. like usual. We got out of bed and we did our usual morning routine to get ready for work. We showered, got dressed, and I texted a coworker at 7 a.m. saying that I would meet them at 7:45. They replied and said okay at 7:30. Then my GF and I had our morning coffee together and I went to get my shoes on. Then I looked at the clock and it was 9 a.m. I freaked the f*** out because I was late for work. I thought my phone clock was off, but my GF's was the same. We both had missed calls and texts from the span of 7:30 until 9 a.m. We were both weirded out by the situation. 1.5 hours passed while we were in the kitchen for 10 minutes. I experienced this a few months ago. Lack of sleep, long hours of physical and mental exertion, late at night, and bam. Wake up 16 hours later in a hospital bed surrounded by my family and girlfriend. GF said I was only saying one word or two at a time and repeating them over and over and that voices were telling me to do it. Doctor said the event was a schizophrenic incident triggered by the factors listed above. Scary time, and I don't remember a single bit of it. After my dad passed away, my stepmom kept asking me if I found the book he was reading in his last month. She didn't know the title. We looked all over the house for it. Eventually found it with a stack of magazines, definitely not where it belonged in the house. My stepmom recognized it immediately when found. The title of the book was Hello from Heaven. I also received a phone call 2 days after he passed away. The phone call was from his phone number. For some reason I was too scared to answer. Asked the only person who had the phone, stepmom, if she had called from it. She said she left it in the garage where he always worked. This was 14 years ago. I still regret not answering the phone. My wife's mother recently passed away. Within 2 days the late mother's husband sent my wife and her sisters a text message from the late mother's phone. It was in good spirits. The messages were pre-recorded voiceovers for each of her children and grandchildren. But my wife said she nearly shit herself when she got the text. When I was 13, I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange man's voice. I couldn't understand what he was saying because he was talking really fast, but at one point I heard it say my brother's name and then it started laughing maniacally. My dad heard it too and came running into my room and turned the lights on. No one was there. Absolutely no explanation. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard what sounded like a cult gathering right outside my window. It was like 3 a.m. and I could just very clearly hear a group of people singing/chanting while a baby wailed. After about 10 to 20 minutes, it suddenly stopped. Another time, I woke up in the middle of the night and I heard what sounded like a cult gathering right outside my window. It was like 3 a.m. and I could just very clearly hear a group of people singing/chanting while a baby wailed. After about 10 to 20 minutes, it suddenly stopped. I used to get these weird audio hallucinations as a kid when trying to fall asleep. A faint radio/TV talk show with several people going back and forth. I could tell that it was people talking, but couldn't make out any of the words. It was also just barely audible. It would only happen when there was absolute silence, and if I turned my head a couple of times it would go away for a bit. Went away as I got older. It didn't worry me that much because I had seen people on the internet talking about the same thing. I read several theories. Like sometimes, if your house is close to a radio station, the wiring in your house and your appliances will sometimes actually vibrate in a way that plays the signals back. But there were no nearby radio stations, plus a lively talk show wouldn't be on at 1 a.m. The other one I read is that your brain will sometimes create audio stimuli when there is absolute silence. However, I haven't seen a lot of concrete evidence for this, i.e. a study, just random websites talking about it. Even in my late 20s, I still experience auditory hallucinations as I'm falling asleep from time to time. Doorbells, doors closing and creaking, thumps and bumps, voices, dog barks, etc. Sometimes it gives me a bit of a startle, but it generally doesn't bother me much. Thankfully my noise-reactive dog sleeps in my room with me at night, so it's very easy for me to know the difference between my imagination and reality. I was in my laundry room, and I heard someone come up behind me, and I swear they whispered. I screamed so loud and thought it was my husband playing a prank on me. When I turned around no one was there, and it was so freaky. Also, when I was a teenager I was sitting in my room at my computer desk, and piece of paper and pen went up in the air and slammed back down. I ran downstairs to tell my mom, and I was crying hysterically. My mom thinks I just hallucinated it. I work in a prison. Before my job in the jail changed, I used to have about 1.5 hours of downtime before it was time to punch out. My SGT at the time asked if I would cover the 11 p.m. count on one of the blocks. He didn't care what I did before or after, just do the count. No prob. I'm sitting at our Times Square area, one hallway leads to 4 blocks, and another hallway leads to the other 4. I'm sitting in front of one of those hallways. I hear someone walking towards me from behind. But I realize I don't hear keys, we all have keys, except inmates. I turn around, no one there. I think, okay maybe I just imagined it. Guy sitting in the area with me asks who it was, I guess I didn't imagine it. Alright then. 11 p.m. comes, I go to the block. No one is letting me in. WTF. I go back to the Times Square area to call and let the officer know not to panic, I'm coming, I just can't get in. As I'm on the phone, I feel someone behind me and they lean into my ear and whisper forcefully, "What they are doing?" I wave my hand back to signal to them to stop. I hang up and turn to yell at who it was, no one is there. No one is in any hallway, I'm all alone. We have so many stories from this place. But your story reminded me of the second part of mine, so I had to tell it. My daughter's school prom. We had brought a beautiful gown and shoes and they were hanging safely in her wardrobe. The evening of the prom she went upstairs to get ready and shouts down to me, "Thanks for getting everything ready for me, Mom." Well, I hadn't been in her room at all. When I went up to see what she was talking about, I found her dress laying on the bed, her shoes next to her dresser and perfume on her dresser. I didn't say anything so she wouldn't freak out, but I spooked me. After that there were other instances like a certain perfume appearing on her dresser, wardrobe doors closing by themselves, etc. After a while we got used to it and would just say thank you when anything happened.